What's up YouTube, it's Clormo with another Logic Pro X tutorial on my Season 3 series, and today we're going to keep talking about Alchemy, sources, and source elements, specifically spectral elements and its controls. In the last video we spoke about additive elements, and I did mention how additive and spectral kind of relate together. You saw that when I covered the import browser and some of that stuff. I think there's quite a few things to cover in this video, so without further ado, I'm just going to jump right into Logic Pro X. And like with the previous videos, I have a different preset with the same MIDI information that you have been seeing, this other Alchemy video. So let's just give it a quick listen. Nice sound. Look at the result in the spectrogram and quickly notice right away that you have additive and spectral for this preset, and I chose it because of that, because I wanted just to have a preset that included a sample that had a spectral element so that we could work from it and try to understand all the options a little bit more clearly. Remember that the parameters will appear when you have spectral selected, as we have right now, and there are two spectral element effects down here at the bottom half. You need to have a sample with a spectral analysis or draw in the spectral edit window, which is not available here, but you saw it when I did the import browser bit. And if you don't remember, just as a recap, let's if we go to source, we're working with source A, and you go to your source and go to import audio, you're gonna have your folders or your libraries available, and you can choose any of them, and you can bring your sample in any of these analysis modes: additive, spectral, or add spec. Spectral and add spec are the ones that are going to give you that option to have the spectral element controls available to you. So this is one of those that will let us do that. A little background on spectral resynthesis. Spectral analyzes changing frequency spectrum of a signal and attempts to recreate those spectral characteristics. That's why if you bring something in additive and the sample has some spectral elements, it won't recreate them in a good way. And please check previous videos to have more details on that, because I already explained that portion. But anyway, in Alchemy, that spectrum of a signal will be split into a large number of spectral bins. So you kind of can see that in the spectrogram when you play your sample. That signal is analyzed across all of these bins, and the sound is recreated by filling each of these bins with the required amount of signal, and you will be using either a sine wave or a filtered noise, and then the results are all summed up and your sound comes through. That's kind of a little bit of a background and recap of what spectral does, but let's just talk about the actual elements that we have here. The first thing that we have is an on and off button, and that's the same as additive. You can turn it on and off if you have a sample that has both elements, and then you can just let the engine recreate one aspect or the other, or one element or the other. Then to the right, you have a volume knob, same as with additive. This is just going to give a relative volume to what elements you have available if you have more than one. In this case, we have additive, which is off, but we'll turn it on later to see what that does. And then you have your formants, and which are turned off as well. So here right now I'm 0 dB. I'm just gonna change it a little bit just in case. To the right of that, we have pitch and noise buttons, and this is where some of the stuff that I just said in the beginning of this video comes into play. So Pitch is the element or the portion of the engine which fills those spectral bins with sine waves. Noise will do the same, but with filtered noise. These are usually automatically chosen for you based on the sample. And like I said in the additive video, a lot of the stuff that you can do will 99.9% of the time be tied to the source and the sample and the quality of the sample that you're bringing. No different here in spectral, and you'll see it's the same for the other elements. But just going back to what pitch and noise do, the way that you import your sample, it's gonna determine right away what pitch and noise do. So for example, if you import something with just spectral, you'll only get the spectral element active, which makes sense, and the mode will automatically be set to pitch. So that means that the bins will get filled with sine waves. That will be the best choice for that type of import, because the noise mode will be more useful for transforming stuff like pitch patterns and more complex sounds that have those quieter frequencies on them. If you bring something with add plus spec in your import browser, then both additive and spectral will be available, and then noise will be set as a default, because you want to have, like I said, that noise to take care of the frequencies and the sound elements that additive cannot produce, because additive is not suitable for that noise filtering, or is one of the drawbacks that it has. So hopefully that serves as a little bit of a recap and you understood that. Then we will go to the far right. We have our low cut and high cut. And that's pretty self-explanatory, very simple. We have seen it before. If you use a low cut, you will set off a cutoff frequency, and any frequency that's above that cutoff point will be allowed to pass. Everything below that will be cut, and the high cut button would do the opposite of that. In combination, when you use both of them, you have a bandpass filter. And if you remember from your equalization, and you can check my video on that on my sample tutorial series, you technically just let your frequencies that are between the low and the high cut pass, right? So that's why it's a bandpass. It's equivalent to that bandpass filter that you have in your EQ, where the frequencies that are between these two cutoff points are allowed to pass. So nothing extraordinary so far with these spectral element controls. But now we're going to talk about the spectral element effects, and this, like in additive, provide just a sheer amount of creative options for you to choose from. Even though the list is limited, it just opens up so many possibilities that it's an awesome tool. This here, they're quite different to the filters that you have seen before. But anyway, moving on. Same, everything's gonna be tied to the type of source that you have, right? The type of result that you're gonna get. But just to explain a little bit what they do, what we can do here, and how to enable them, you have on and off buttons, same as with other things that we've seen before. We're gonna turn both on, and you have a pop-up menu where you can choose from any one combination from this list. I'm gonna choose bloom and blur for now, because I want to talk about all of them a little bit. And the first thing that we need to notice is that these 4 parameters that you have available under each effect, it's the same amount for all of them. You still have 4 options or 4 parameters. The only one that's common to all of them is the mix knob. And the mix knob is just going to set a balance between the both of them, right? So that makes a lot of sense. If you want to have a certain percentage of this in your signal and a certain percentage of this in your signal, then that will get summed in the end and produce a effect and a subsequent sound, right? Based on your source and the frequency range and pitch, harmonics, all of that stuff, right? Then you have parameter knobs 1, 2, and 3. And these 3 will be specific to the type of filter effect that you have selected. So for example, let's start with Bloom. Bloom produces a burst of frequencies that's based on the source. As I've said before, this effect will create a small amount of calculation in order to collect that data and then release the frequencies. So that means that there can be a small delay between the note press and the effect being heard or audible. A good candidate, I think, to use this effect on our like strong note samples or one note samples like piano notes, because they have a typically they have a stronger attack rate. So going through the parameter knobs, you have a threshold knob that's just going to set the amount of the lower amplitude frequencies heard in the effect. Your attack knob, self-explanatory, will set the time that it takes for the effect frequencies to fade in, and the shift knob will move the emphasis of the effect from lower to higher harmonics. And when it's centered at 0, the original frequency balance is going to be used. So technically there will be no shift. And right now it's at 0. Blur produces a frequency blurring effect. There's no other way that I can explain it that well. I think it's a good candidate for melodic loops, and where there are more pitch variations. So those of you that like to use soul samples might want to try this. I am only saying this because I have tried these, and you will see as I go on down the list that some of them I haven't tried, and I really don't have like a good example maybe to give you. But anyway, for the parameters, you have a length knob that just set the time period that the frequencies are going to be sustained or blurred over time, right? The variance knob will set the degree of variation for the frequency selection, and obviously it's going to be tied to the amount and range of frequencies that you have from each sample. And then your gate knob will determine the impact of the source sound envelope on the effect and the number of audible frequencies. For example, again, when you use it on a loop, if you put a higher setting on the gate, a simplified sound with more frequent gaps might be the output. So you may get some choppier results as opposed to having a smoother number, because it's like you're trying to put that blur. If you think about the word blur as it were to blur an image, right? If you're putting a gate and that's your sound passing through it and you're blurring it, then the result might be choppier, right? You might have areas that are clear, like frequencies that are going to be more complete, and frequencies that are going to be a little bit less complete, blurrier, and so on and so forth, right? Hopefully that analogy wasn't that confusing. Let's since we have both on, let's play what we have before moving on, and just gonna do some quick edits here. Let's see. You set the frequencies. Oh, there's some morphing there. Probably not gonna be that noticeable, but let me bring that down a little bit. Alright, so let's move on. Let's go to cloud and frequency shift. Cloud, let's see, it's similar to a chorus effect, I would say, and will create like grains of frequency, so I think it's better, or it's a good starting point would be vocal samples. The threshold knob is gonna set a sustained emphasis on the highest amplitude harmonics. The attack knob, same thing, you just set the time for the frequencies to fade in. Simplify knob, this is something that I don't remember seeing before in other synths, and if I have discussed this before in other videos, then my apologies. I'm just have been dealing with Alchemy so much that I'm kind of deleting from my mind the other sense. But the simplifying knob, what it kind of does is like reduce the lower amplitude frequencies to enhance prominent frequencies. So it's gonna give you less detail in favor of giving you more of a tone result. So so I can see why it's called simplifying knob, because it will try to do less calculations to give you more detail and just give you more warmth and that type of stuff. So it's kind of unique to me, I guess. Then frequency shift. The frequency shift, what it's going to do is just move the spectral bins higher or lower in the spectrum. So it kind of does something similar to cloud in that it will accentuate some frequencies and even drop some completely. And as such, it could be a very unique tool for you to manipulate samples and get very interesting results. Again, here I would say like piano notes would probably be best to try here. And going through the different parameters, you have your shift knob, so that's just gonna tell you how you're shifting your bins up and down in the frequency spectrum. Good to note here is that maybe you want to start with small adjustments here in the parameter, because it has a very wide range. So if you don't have a lot of frequencies in your source and you just go nuts with the shift, you're not really gonna get anything useful, because you have such a limited amount of frequencies and you're just shifting them everywhere, and you're probably just gonna end up eliminating the whole sound. The feedback knob is just gonna set the intensity of your frequencies, and the LP cutoff knob is gonna set an additional cutoff frequency, where usually it's gonna work independently from the bandpass filter, but you're still adding another low cut to the source that you're dealing with, right? So keep that in mind. So now, instead of me just keep trying them all, I'll just keep going, just because I realize I have a region. It might be a little bit more difficult to try to get something to show, and also because I'm not really using a sample with a lot of stuff on it, right? It's just some MIDI information. If I was playing the sample itself, I would get more useful results from here. So I'm just gonna move on. Sorry about that. Let's go to frequency. Let's go to gate. So your frequency stretch causes unusual harmonic stretches and randomizations. And I'll be honest, I haven't been able to test this one much. And it seems to be greatly dependent on your frequency range as well. So those two, your frequency shift and stretch, will give you very different results depending on your source and your frequency range. So I would say again that perhaps vocals might be a good thing to test out here. But anyway, you have alpha and beta knobs. So I'm just gonna shift the harmonics that you produce in the formant filter. So that's why, thinking about formants, vocal samples might be better, or might give you a better result, might be a less waste of your time. A setting of 1 in the alpha will be the closest to the sound source. And then in the beta, you're going to set the frequency range of the effect. So a setting of 1 is the closest again to the source that you have, and the variance is just going to introduce the randomization. And really, it all ties again to the source, your sample, and your alpha and beta. So I have really no other thing to tell you here to try to make you understand what it does. You will have to test it yourself, really. Then the gate, it's like combining a square wave LFO like with an envelope firewall modulation. It's modulation, really, like what it's kind of doing in behind the scenes. This again could create a choppy or smoother sound, like I was talking about before with that other gate. So I would say that you maybe want to try it with drum patterns, drum loops, or shorter drum patterns, and try to get that similar effect that you can get from the pitch shifter when you you shop and move transients around. The threshold knob is just going to set the amount of the lower amplitude frequencies that are allowed to pass through the gate. So that again will reduce detail and enhance prominent frequencies. The attack knob again just set the time that it takes to fade in, but here we have a decay knob, and so that's just going to set the time that the effect frequencies are going to be fading out. Let's move to glide. Glide is going to be quick. So glide is just the usual glide that we have seen before. So you know how it works. It's just sort of like a sweep between note presses. So there's also a little delay here in this filter effect between the note press and the result. So your source material will really affect the sound in so many different ways. It will just depend so much on that I don't really have a good example here for you either, but what I would say, maybe bring something like a loop that has maybe a lot of chord presses, a few chord progressions, or a good melodic note presses like piano, stuff like that, because you're changing from one note to the other. You're probably gonna get a more distinctive glide effect there than if you have longer notes between each other. You should still be able to get the effect to work in that case too, because it's just a glide effect, right? As if the sounds are overlapping, the glide should come out. But just a suggestion. The width knob is going to set the width of the filter, again the frequency range or band of the effective filter. Then the shift knob is just going to set a height for that sweep. So similar to glide as we have seen before. Metalize will just create a metal-like filter effect, and I would say that you can test that with pretty much anything you want. The interval knob will set the frequency. Your simplify will do the same thing as the simplify that we saw before. And then the feedback knob, again, which is going to set the intensity of that effect. Moving to shimmer and shuffle. Shimmer will sweep frequencies to different degrees and speed, so it's going to be another type of randomizer, and it can create slow shifts or fast shimmering sounds. It will depend on the degree and speed that you're sweeping your frequencies, right? So it's going to create kind of a feedback. That's why you have that feedback knob there too, so you can set the intensity of it, and the rate will pretty much just set that speed, and the shimmer is going to be that the intensity of that frequency sweep. If you go to shuffle will just randomly rearrange blocks of bins, and I have no idea at this point how to create a result knowingly, right? Like if I say, okay, I'm gonna set this to these parameters, I'm gonna get this result. It's just very random, very abstract in my view. I need to play a little bit more with that one. The factor knob, I think that what that does is just sets a percentage of those bins that you want to shuffle. So that's similar to how we were doing in additive. We were playing with those partials, but here they're called bins. your range, it's gonna set the thing that's just gonna set the distance that you want to move those. So the factor is gonna set the amount, the range is gonna set how apart they're gonna be, how they're gonna be shuffled, and then how many bins are contained in each block. So that, again, very similar to that partials, how we manipulated that. And last but not least, we have smear. So smear will average between blocks of frequencies to create a more consistent sound. So it's similar, but at the same time different to blur. And because of that, I would say that melodic loops will probably give you a quick idea of how the effect is working out. Your smooth knob will set the number of frequency blocks to smooth, and the higher you make this setting, the less sonic variation you're gonna have. So similar to blur, if you're just gonna put everything up, you're just gonna blur everything and you're not gonna get anything out of it. Your bright knob is just gonna emphasize the higher frequency, will make it brighter, right? So think about, again, equalization for a minute. And then your phase on is gonna enable the original phases of the source sound. So there's a natural variation of sounds that this will give you. So with that, really, I'm gonna just close the tutorial. There's quite a few things to digest here, but I think the gist of it is that same as we have been dealing, and I'm gonna keep repeating in all these source element videos. The source that you have, it's gonna determine how far can you go with these effects and with the source elements controls. Because if you have something like a loop with a lot of instruments on it, your frequency range will be bigger, and you'll have more control on what you can affect and pinpoint exactly what you want to affect and how. If you have one notes, then some of these filters are probably not going to give you anything, but some of them will be better because they are more targeted to that type of source. So just keep that in mind. I'm gonna keep repeating that a lot because it's really important that you understand that. Just because, like I was doing here, if I start to change some of the knobs and really I don't have any real range or to my frequencies, then I'm not gonna get anything, basically, because I don't have anything. So if I just have a low frequencies, why bother dealing with some of the high cut and the brightness and other stuff? I'm just not gonna be able to introduce that there unless I change my source first, and then be able to give it those effects and produce the results that I'm thinking, right? This is sound designing and all that stuff behind it's visualizing all of this. So always refer back to equalization basics and scene frequencies. It will help you out, if you bring up your EQ for some of this stuff, so that you can see how you're altering and what you have available to you, right? So with that, I'm gonna leave you for now. In the next video, we're gonna keep talking about the same thing: source element controls and parameters in Alchemy. And again, I will try my best to make sure to catch up with this a little bit quicker, as opposed to putting one video out a week. But that's probably gonna be happening in 2 weeks time, like I said before. So thanks for the new subscribers, the likes, the comments, the questions. If you want to see more of my work, make sure that you check me out on social media, and you can see all my contacts there on the graphic below the border of the video. Thanks again for everything. Thanks for watching. Subscribe, like, and share. Peace out, YouTube.